Welcome. You are listening to the Be a Better Being podcast, hosted by Michelle Zellner and Sasha Berscheid. Michelle and Sasha are here to give you information and inspiration to help you live your healthiest, happiest lives. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
Greetings. Thank you for tuning in to the Be a Better Being podcast. I'm Michelle Zellner, your host, and I have two really beautiful ladies with me today, one of them being my pod partner, Sasha. How are you, darling?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this cold, brand new year.
Yes. It is a brand new year. We're about 3 weeks in. I hope everybody's having a fantastic start so far. Super excited for this guest because she is going to help you figure out if you're not having a fantastic start, maybe why not, what to do, how to get you unstuck, moving forward, make some shifts. Astara Raven, welcome. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here on this very cold, although heat wave morning, because it's going to be a high of 9 today. What?
Don't we love winter? Yes. So listeners, if you've been following along, you have heard Astara be talked about several times by Sasha, because she is one of the people in Sasha's life who has really made a huge impact in guiding her towards where she happens to be now, and most likely going to be continuing on that journey with her. So Sasha, just let's give a little recap about how you know Astara, what she's done for you, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Sure. So I always love telling people my stories about how I met people. And I think Astara's story is one of those that is worth retelling. Back when I was really heavily invested in lit and trying to get a community rallied together of independent thinkers and female entrepreneurs here in the Omaha area, we would go and do meetups at least once a week. And Astara joined us at one of the meetups. It's just like a networking event where you introduce yourself, what you stand for, what your passions are. And during that meetup, Astara let me know that, she was an architect in Silicon Valley for many, many years, a very male dominant industry, that she had worked with some of the biggest go green architects and, so many different projects throughout the land. And while she was telling me all of this, and so then she said, after doing some self-reflection and having a self-revelation, she moved from California to Nebraska to take on a project. Talks about it in her book. All of you, I would love for you to get her book. It'll really help you in the narrative that you guide yourself, talking to yourself now, but also talking to the younger version of you. And while she moved to Nebraska, never, grew up in the Valley of California, never once saw herself, not being an architect, also never once saw herself living anywhere other than a bigger city, but really, California and the Valley and all that stuff. She found herself relocating to Omaha and she quit her job. And then she decided that she wanted to take all of her gifts, all of her God-given gifts, and start to really just connect with other people. And her gifts are healing. Her gifts are energy work. She was my shaman during the darkest time of my life. She helped guide me. I mean, I was just so broken. It was back when I was living in my mom's basement, and, just like a short little year ago, helped guide me back to me. We used so many different modalities, healing modalities, to help me channel my true self, calling myself back into my power, calling myself back into myself.
And Sasha, hearing your words is just such a gift, for anybody that does work to guide and help others, which you guys do in your own ways, whether it's a podcast or all the different kind of nonprofit benevolence and goodness that Sasha is kind of seeding in Omaha and the region. It is exciting to hear from somebody else, as we all know, like, oh my gosh, that helped. So, I mean, I know it in my deepest knowing, but it's a great reminder of why I do what I do. And Sasha, I'm so grateful that we met and that it was that fateful morning or afternoon. I can't remember what time of day, but that I came to that meeting and kind of just showed up a little late, shared a little bit about myself, and did not know all that synchronicity and synergy was happening from the universe for you and me to eventually, months later, kind of coalesce and find how I could be of service. So I am excited that it was of service, right? That's what we all want to know, is that what we show up with does actually contribute. And that's what I found in the things that, so a lot of what Sasha was sharing is some of these extracurricular soul tools that I use. Interestingly enough, it was my architecture career that gave me the first entree into what I would term, playfully using a different lens, shamanism, but understanding nature, understanding the systems of nature, getting more interested in a systems thinking rather than a siloed approach. As we know, in most businesses, we do strategic planning. We sit down, we kind of brainstorm. We find the things that don't quite apply to the thesis at hand, we'll put in the parking lot. And we've got these, all these things over in the parking lot. We're looking at trying to stay focused, trying to stay linear, trying to stay structured. And that works to some degree because that's how our brains work. And so what Sasha's describing when she says drumming and when she talks about all the different sound frequencies and the things that we did and the energy work I do, and there's so much more that we'll talk about with that fun stuff, is honestly, if I were to use a different language and I were to put on my architect hat, which I still have my license in California, and I was able to take my sustainable leader hat, I would say what we did, Sasha and I, is we worked as an ecosystem and we thought as nature's intelligence, and we worked in a way that contributed. If Sasha we're all a design project, right? And if Sasha were to look at the landscape of her life and how the buildings and the ideas and projects she was placing upon that landscape, the landscape had some context and some climate needs that weren't being met. And, various systems were not failing, but having struggle. And so you have to look at the whole thing. You can't just go, oh, let's focus on this one symptom. So I bring that to my spiritual work as much as I used to bring it to my architectural design work. And it's kind of a fun thing that I'm going to be starting to work with this one nonprofit in Omaha, and they have a whole bunch of doctors and healthcare and medical folk that come. And there's always this fear of, if I do too much of the woo language, or if I say something that's a little too like, what is that? Like Sasha was talking about earlier, that some people might say, what'd you do with her? And I realized, well, we can use a different language. So one of the things I'll offer to this conversation is I can use one set of words to describe what I do that would be shamanic and psychic mediumship and intuition and, all that. Or I could just talk about it medically and say, I use more of my brain than some people. It's not because I'm smarter. It's just because I kind of use some of those muscles and aspects. I use more of my body than some. It's not because I'm running marathons. I'm not right now. But it is a sense of, if we listen to the body, I'm trying to help others do that. And when they do, magic happens. So on one level, when we talk of, I love the title of your podcast, Better Being. Like when we think of bettering ourselves, we think, well, we could approach it with lots of different language, depending on a comfort level of somebody. If they're really much more in a particular religion, or if they have a different cultural need, if they have a certain economic bracket that they're in, if there's, there's so many ways that we show up in this world, and we all belong and we all get to show up. So then we think, well, how can I speak a language that'll make sense for them, that won't feel threatening? And, some days we do it better than others, but I can say almost everything that we'll talk about that's sort of juicy, extracurricular, spiritual, I can frame science, medical, and take it to a different pragmatic. So I call myself a pragmatic mystic, and so does my partner, Ryan, my other half of Illuminating Hearts, because we realize if you can't pragmatically take action on a thing, and you can't help it be accessible to people, then it'll just stay esoteric and like abstract and, what are you doing? Yeah. So I love having the opportunity to work with Sasha, because she's such a strong, fierce woman who's not afraid of her path. And however, tired and depleted she was when she showed up at my door, she strengthened herself and she was willing, and she showed up and she did the work. And so really it's Sasha that guided herself, although I absolutely had an active role. But that's where the success is. So, I'm just throwing out some ideas, but I really love that concept of what language do we use, and can we make it, how accessible can we make this?
Well, I think that is such a great skill to have, because not everybody can speak various languages, right? Knowing how to speak to a certain audience. And I think especially when it comes to some of the things that you do, you're right. People get a little skeptical or afraid, or it's against their religion, and then they just put up a complete wall. And when you just understand that a human is a human is a human, no matter what your religion or your gender or your culture, right? We're all human, and we are all designed with the same things. We're just put together in different ways.
Yeah.
And I love how you talk about like the landscape of what we have and the architecture, because, you know, that analogy of something that is a concrete item versus a living, breathing, you know, human experiencing things.
Yeah.
We don't really see it the same. And yet I somewhat use that analogy as well. Like if you're going to build a house, you need a super solid foundation. Doesn't matter how fancy dancy your countertops are if your foundation is really cracked. Well, same with this, right? Sasha and I talk about all that, the foundational needs. And if your foundational needs are not buttoned up and solid, you can put all the bling on you want. It's not going to be the healthy, happy, thriving version of a human. Astara, at what point did you recognize that you had these gifts? And was this something that you practiced yourself before kind of pivoting into helping others?
Good question. Yeah. You know, in an interesting way, I found out in my 40s that I've been kind of sitting and playing with these gifts since I was really young. I think my earliest memory of having what we would consider maybe a shaman dream or journey, or, you know, maybe just an inner vision, imaginative journey to understand what's happening around us and gain wisdom from the experience, that happened when I was 4. So I've had other senses when I was in some of my early childhood therapy in my 30s. This is, you know, over 20 years ago, but there was a sense of in this moment, you know, a psychologist or a therapist will come to you and say, what's your earliest memory, or when do you remember this happening? And we would think rationally, well, it would have to be after 4 or 5. And I remember having a memory when I was 1. And it wasn't until less than a year later, I was helping my parents move from LA up to Seattle area. And we were looking through photos, and there was the thing I was describing to my therapist in a picture. And I went to my brother, who's 6 years older, so he has some context. And I said, was this taken in Westlake in the LA area when I was really young, like 1? He goes, yeah. And I said, is this the stairwell that goes up to the 2nd floor? You know, I'm describing. And he said, yeah. And I remembered exactly. So one of the things when it started was way before I knew it was starting. So but then we have to be conscious of it. And the cognizance and the consciousness of it began in my early 30s. And I had a very powerful Native American experience with a medicine man with about 40 other people in a very incredible, I think it was the Sioux tradition, or no, maybe it was Lakota. It's hard for me to remember. It's been a chunk of years. I think it was the Lakota tradition, but there was a medicine man. We did some peyote and we had this experience. It was a religious and an incredible spiritual event for a friend of mine who was getting married. And so you sit up all night, you sit with the medicine, and you have a medicine keeper, and then you have a fire tender, and you have all these things, but you can't leave the tent. You can't go to sleep. You can't rest. You can't do anything. You just sit there. And I had a life-changing experience. And I came out of that and met a psychic medium who became a mentor of mine. And I got into tarot, and it became, you know, I'm an architect, I'm visual. So it makes sense if you think of the visual art of a card, you know, just for fun, here's a card. It's just the random one I pulled up. But when you look at any art of any deck, you're just gonna have a gestalt, or like a subconscious hit, or a feeling of, oh, this is what I think when I see that artwork or that word or that number. And I got really passionate with tarot. So from that moment on, it was like game on. And I learned all these different things around kinesiology, understanding the muscle motor response of the body, how it doesn't lie, that the ego can try to cover and block and hide, but the body will always hold the truth. So I learned dowsing and working with the body and missile testing. Later, I learned shamanic journeying. And in that experience, I realized I've been doing this my whole life. So that's the long answer of, I really kind of came to it from my 30s and 40s. while I was architecting, while I was getting licensed, I got licensed at 34. I was already doing tarot by that time for 4 years. I was already trying all these different exciting things, already understanding therapeutic trauma models. Like, I may not have gone and got a psychology degree, but my passion, my gifts, you can't not be them. So even if it's you learning through your own lesson plan, eventually people will get their own master's and PhD, so to speak. So those are the things that I was learning all along the way. And when I wasn't traveling for work or working, because I worked hard and I was happy to do so, I was doing workshops and learning new tools and skills and like taking every healing modality in that I could possibly take in. So obviously the passion was there, whether I realized it or not. So when the time came, the big aha that Sasha was describing when I finally resigned my corporate gig in 2016, we had a good over 20 years of building the like, is this the right thing for me? Should I be doing something else? I was a good architect, but there was a sense of something was missing. It's like if you think of 0 to 100, and 100 is like the full potential of who we can be that we don't realize. I was kind of operating at 80% for a long, long time. And that's a high percentage. Some people don't even get to 50. So I'm very, very blessed and grateful that I advanced architecture to like the farthest degree that I could. I created this whole new role for myself at HDR when I was still working there. I was a biophilic and biomimicry design leader, and I was helping people with wellness design and sustainability. So I got to like the kind of spiritual pinnacle of my architect role, but I couldn't go any further. And that's why I had to go. And it wasn't anything bad on them. It was just, okay, I have to do something about these gifts that have been laying dormant and quiet because of our cultural agreements around what's that thing? And are you sure? Because we really like what we can see and what's solid and what we can touch. But what most people don't know is from a quantum physics level and from the level of our reality, so much of what we think we're seeing is actually got a whole nother realm at the unseen levels. And that's kind of my gift is I went from building the solid forms and working in the environment of the built environment to exploring the inner soul environment and helping people see that's where their symptoms are coming from. That's where all of the outside world is reflecting.
Well, certainly your gifts and talents are much needed because, as we know, the amount of physical, mental, and emotional trauma and disease that is walking around day to day is exorbitant. And I think because we are so mired in this quick fix society and we want a pill for it to wrap it up and take care of it, it can be a daunting journey for someone. And so at some point, if someone comes to you with whatever it is, right, just kind of walk us through what that would look like. Someone finally says, okay, I've tried everything. I can't seem to break through. I can't seem to get better. What does that look like from maybe, the person coming to you? What does that look like from their end?
It can vary. There is a definite sort of a protocol that has organically and spontaneously emerged. One of the things I try to do, depending on if they're just for one session or two versus like, oh yeah, I want to commit and stay with you and unfold it like Sasha did, where, I really need the ongoing support. And of course, it'll just vary on, some people call it soul age. You can call it anything, but it's nothing like superior. There's no, oh, old souls and bad young souls are good or bad. It's more just, if you went up to somebody that was in the 5th or 6th grade, you wouldn't say, unless they were a special someone that had a certain kind of intelligence, you wouldn't say, hey, let's work on differential equations and let's like talk about deep traumatic things. Like if they had developmental abilities, you'd meet them at that level. So I have some clients come that are like in the suicidal tendency thoughts. They're deeply down in the dark places. So you start small and you think, okay, well, probably the first thing that we need to do is work on the nervous system. And how do we either up or down regulate it depending on if it's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, because all of those have different physiological needs. You don't treat fight the same way you treat freeze. You don't treat fawn the same way you treat flight. And it's not like it's really obvious sometimes. So I have intake forms. I ask a lot of questions. I try to assess their comfort level, their language. I'll ask, how do you feel about the concepts of death, rebirth, and reincarnation? How do you feel about me using tarot? Is that uncomfortable for you with your cultural systems? Are you open? Like if they're uncomfortable, are you open? So it really like a gauging, like any health care practitioner would do is, here's your health history. Let me know, and we go. So I'm looking kind of at their soul history, not only their health, but I will ask, some people, especially if they're in deep, deep depression, anxiety, or suicidal thoughts, like, what's your pharma? What are you taking? How do you feel with that? Do you have an ongoing doctor relationship, therapist relationship? Like we have to gauge kind of what's the environment, right? So we talk about the site plan. So we know what the building wants to do. And then I try to help build bridges to get them from maybe a dissonant, noisy system that is honestly not their noise. Like think of a lot of our sound healing, even if a person never comes to me for one-on-one, that deep integrative work, and they just want to come to a sound event and leave, we're still going to dissolve some of that noise that's not them. And what, Michelle, you're describing in our world, which is really noisy, is we have a lot of unresolvedness. We have a lot of unrecognized trauma. That's why one of my heroes is Gabor Mate. And his latest book, the title says everything, The Myth of Normal. And he talks about how normal is really toxic. And so a lot of times the other thing that I do is in the work itself, depending on their comfort level, what we need to language things as, what tools might be best for them to be supportive for their particular needs, is, we come in and we basically give permission slips out. So a lot of what I'm doing is just saying to a person, could you have permission to be you? Because it sounds great, right? We say, oh, be yourself, live your true self out, like do your dreams. But a lot of times if somebody doesn't have an environmental circumstance that supports them, like let's say something happens, they don't have the economics to come back to me, their body's going to regulate and say, this is as deep as I can go, unless they have support to when the big stuff happens. Because guess what? As soon as we say yes, old pain comes up, old trauma. So a lot of what I do is sort of assess at an intuitive level. If I can't get all the details and data, I talk to their expanded self and I say, what can they handle? Like what's in their highest and best? Because the last thing that I would like to do is go in, because I love going in deep, but if we go in deep and they can't handle it or blows a circuit or they're overwhelmed, there's nothing that I can do to reverse that unless I'm there to help them through it. That's my goal, right? To be there to help them. But a lot of the work can happen between sessions. So it really depends. But let's say we're going to take a kind of avatar person who's super open, likes all the woo, is ready to talk some of the tools with me and just goes, I'm ready, let's go. A lot of times what I'll do is sit in a channeled state. And all that means, I'm just going to use a little demonstration here, is that electromagnetism, which is this fun slinky in representation, it's spiraling, it's not static. So it goes kind of like let's use gravity. It goes kind of like that. So as that is flowing around you and me and Sasha right now, I get into the center river of that electromagnetism, connect to their center river, try to get them into that state. And then we kind of communicate at that higher electromagnetic level. And what I'll find is a combination of my intuitive knowing and speaking things I might see, like Sasha described. I'll talk to their ancestor, or I might hear we call it the guides, but it's sort of like the beings not in a body that have been with us for lifetimes to help us, and they're not kind of incarnated anymore because they've mastered some of that stuff. And then our higher self, which you could call it a lot of things, the true self, the meta self. It's more just the sense of we're not just our ego and we're not just in our body, although we're absolutely meant to have an ego and absolutely beautifully have our temple of our body, but we have an expanded self. So I'm working at those levels. And then we kind of dive in and figure out if you look at culture, your young self, past life, so other lifetimes, not the one in this body, and then all the genetic data material that hangs out in your blood. And we think, all right, what's the most worst miserable thought or limiting block that this person has? Is it all 4 layers, 1 layer? And where's a good place to start? So that's like, if somebody's ready and they're gung-ho and they've got the circuitry to handle some of these tools and conversations, I jump right in and we go in pretty deep. And honestly, 80 to 90% of my clients are ready. Every once in a while, though, I'll get that person that needs that kind of real hand-holding, not ready for that yet. Let's just talk. Let's get oriented. It's like I'm teaching and building language and circuitry and tools through sound healing and other methods to get them so that they can do that work, but they may not be ready for that work. So it's a real fine line to walk.
Yeah, I imagine by the time they come to you, they've already done a little bit of dabbling, or at least explored it, or talked to somebody who has. And, most people who are super walls up, they're probably not coming to you until that wall has been broken a little bit.
I find that with gift certificates, folks will be so excited and they'll say, I want to bring my colleague, my employee, my best friend, my partner, my mother, my whoever, and they buy a gift certificate. And I tell them that's great and it's awesome and I will happily do that. That doesn't mean that that person's ready. And so what I've found is the small percentage is often the folks that are brought in by another and they don't come of their own accord. Almost everybody that comes of their own accord will get what they need. I worked with an older gentleman who was really, really suicidal and really struggling. And I got him to the place where he did go talk to his doctor again and have a different conversation and see some other folk. And he might cycle back in a year because he'll live to tell the tale and go, now I'm ready. So it's just that wonderful, step-by-step process that, when you think of, I see it as a person who has expanded senses. My inner visuals show it as a fog. Like I'll see a fog or a wall and I'll let them know, hey, you've got a block. Are you willing to release that with me? And I'll just kind of keep it really transparent and help me help them. Because if we can address that block and say, I can't do much unless you let me in, and see if they'll let me in, then a lot of times we can get somewhere. But even to just accomplish that in a session can be potent beyond measure. Then weeks or months later, they go, oh my gosh, I'm ready. So it's all perfect.
Well, Sasha, I know you shared along on other podcast episodes and even just a little bit now, just the things that Astara did with you. Can you, for those who haven't listened, just walk through maybe some of those highlights and maybe those really pivotal experiences that sent you leaps and bounds forward from where you were?
Yeah. So so the first time I really let Astara and Orion into my whatever dimension I was experiencing, they did a coupled sound bath. So I was the only person in the sound bath, but Astara was singing over me and Orion was playing, they have the sound bowls, but then they also have these beautiful gongs and chimes and bells. And I remember breaking down, crying, weeping, sobbing, probably the first or second sound bath I did with them. And it wasn't in, this is like Astara said, it depends on how built out you are, your circuitry. So if I say this and you guys are like, okay, that sounds a little too wooey, this is my personal experience and this is how it helped me. But when she was singing and she did this bird chirping and she just was singing over me, it wasn't from this lifetime. So I had a recollection, and at that moment we all together focused and closed our eyes, and we all together went somewhere together. We time traveled, and in that moment I was an older woman and I was playing with clay, and that was what was in my head. I was playing with the earth, Mother Earth, but it wasn't 2024 Mother Earth. It was 19 1930s, 1940s Mother Earth that I was, and it wasn't in the United States that I was doing. It was like in Central America, and I was playing with the ground itself. So like that's where I time traveled to. And then once I was like done crying and going through all of that, Orion spoke up first, and then Astara confirmed it. But he's like, well, what I saw was that you were working with the earth. Like I saw clay or dirt or something. And I was just like, what is happening? Like, what is happening? And I mean, like, I never experienced anything like that, but I had just gotten in sync with them between the singing, the sound vibrations, and like the drumming. I went to a different place. They all saw the place that I went to. They could see me seeing myself, you know. But after that, it was having the permission slips that she talked about. One of the coolest things that I knew, but I just needed the confirmation of, was my angels that are around me. You know, I have a very powerful lineage of persons that have fought to get to where they got to before they moved on to their next life. And for me, my great grandmother continued to show up over and over and over again. So I thought it was my grandma, or I thought it was my great aunt, but it actually so happens to be my great grandma, Mama Fita, which makes sense that it's her, because after we went through talking of who does this woman represent to you? She also, what would we call it, Astara? She also believes in, it's not like magic, but she also had like a book that was passed down to her in lineages of like, take a salt bath on, these type of days, and, use fire, like to do fire start. Like she has like a book that was passed down to her that is now in my possession. And I wouldn't have known any of this if it wasn't for working with Astara. So like I was able to tap into my ancestors, my ancestry, tap into my higher being, call my power back to me, because I was at a power loss. And so this entire time I, thought it was other people taking my power, but that wasn't the case at all. And so, yeah, if a lot of this sounds like this is way too far out there, it's totally fine. That is just my own perception and my own experience. And it was very beautiful, and it was everything that I needed. It wasn't anything from 2024. It was something that is so beyond what I can even put words to.
Beautiful.
Well, Astara, if you could just explain how, because I know, Sasha, to your point, a lot of people are like, oh, whatever, I can't even, right?
I mean, right.
Explain like the medical science behind, the gong and the drums and singing, and how that channels into someone like Sasha, and for the three of you to go and have the same experience.
Absolutely. I'd love to. And thank you, Sasha, for sharing that really incredible and vulnerable story. And I love it. It is this. So I showed you that slinky and this concept that we've got this spiraling electromagnetism. So on one level, you could think of it, I was a sustainability gal, so it was all about recycling. And the inside joke I had to myself when I discovered energy codes and understanding emotion and how it's energy and motion, and how everything is either electric or magnetic. Our thoughts are electric, our feelings are magnetic, and they work together. It's sometimes a feeling feels like a thought, and a thought feels like a feeling. So we're really in this river of energy, and it's always infinitely recycling. So we're always good recyclers. And what happens is, think of it as, whether or not somebody knows about acupuncture or chiropractics, the concept is either you're going to get the spine open and long and not stuck and compressed on certain vertebrae so that river can communicate. In Chinese medicine, it's similar, where you're going to put needles or acupressure points or something along meridian points to get the river moving again. So I want you to imagine that if you had a sort of a field flowing, but then suddenly, we've all had those days, because look at the world, like, Michelle, you were talking about how intense it is right now. It's easy for people to get a wobble in their field. Literally, it's as if those days where you're like, accident prone, things are falling, you just miss a car, you think, wait, I'm a good driver, like what just happened? Or you feel shaky, or you're emotional and you don't know what's going on. There's a wobble in the field. So if you were to take a guitar down from hanging on the wall or from its case and you wanted to go play as a guitarist, you'd tune the guitar up. Like if somebody didn't tune the guitar up and they'd sit down to play, row, row, row your boat, you'd hear this, these awful notes. And we'd laugh and go, oh my God, will you please tune up your guitar before you play it? Well, a lot of us don't do that. And we don't even maybe hear that we're discordant. We don't hear that our notes are not harmonizing. And we think, whatever. And we are a workaholic society because it's good production for our business. But at some level, it takes a toll. So to have more mindfulness, you can see how popular that is. Guided meditations, we have Insight Timer, like all these great tools and apps showing up because people are hungry to tune themselves up. Because what would it be like if in school, and not only did we pledge allegiance or do these other things, but we went and said, hey, are you tuned up today? Can you imagine? So I think schools are starting to get that because there's emotional intelligence, a curricula that is starting to come in. It's so exciting, not just the magnet schools, but others. But we have to get more on board with that. So we need to tune ourselves up. So we are all that finely tuned instrument. And Orion and I will talk about this in our sound alchemy events. But what we do is we either do it through actual sound, which is another form of resonance, or we can do it through breath, which actually is a tool inside of us that's free. We can even do sound ourselves. So how many people sing in the shower, in the car? Can I get a witness? It's like when nobody's looking, we're just like RESPCT, and the song comes on and we're singing and crying and laughing. Well, that tunes us up. So we often teach people breath and sound tools that they can use for free at home. And then, can they go get a $3,000 gong? Maybe not. And so there's simple little like tuning forks and small bowls, a guitar or piano. If somebody likes to play music, we'll do it. But there's lots of ways to tune the biofield. And what ends up happening is if the biofield is not wobbly, the actual body, the physiology, the structure of the body can work better. And then there's another aspect. So if you were to think of Sasha's story, we had all these instruments. So we're getting her noise dissolved. We're uncoupling her literally on a massage table from the vibration of this dense earth plane that's like, whew, right? The newsreels. And that's all we have to look at to know how dense it is. And she has a moment to just be with her own feelings. Her energetic of crying is this wonderful release valve of water. And water is we're 99% water by molecule. So like there's this, I get to be the flow that I am. And something is held, and it can finally be released. And that tunes her up. So we uncoupled her. We tuned up her biofield. She was able to feel all this stuff finally and have the space, the environment, the architecture to do it in, literally and figuratively. And then once she's getting tuned up and she's got an instrument able to sing, so to speak, suddenly she can access more of her brain and body. Now we have an alpha and a theta state of the brain that's kind of a fun place to be. Delta is sleep. Beta is us talking in this podcast right now. If we practice going to alpha, which is that place, when you watch a little baby and they go, coo, ooh, wow. They look at things wide-eyed and wonder. That's alpha. So it's kind of associated with joy and a state of wonder. Theta is associated with visionary capacity. Our best imaginative, like an architect who's out there drawing a building, visioning it out of nothing and nowhere, they're using a lot of alpha and theta. They don't know this maybe, and they might be a gifted designer because they're able to, without any training from me or understand what the heck is going on. I once told an architect that was a really good designer in one of my firms in San Francisco, I said, you know that you act like a shaman in this world. And he looked at me, he's like, what the hell are you talking about, lady? But he was intrigued because nobody's ever said that to him before. I said, you go in and you see things others can't, and you help bring it into the world so that they might see it too. And he's like, I never thought of it that way. So on some level, architects can be shamanic. So to navigate the unseen is really to become like little quantum scientists and physicists and go, okay, this slinky that Astara keeps referring to and puts in a lot of her reels and in her events and workshops and cells as a tool to help kids and parents and psychologists and all the people there's something to all this, and it's a physics thing. So if we use more of our brain, we're going to have better soil health in the agriculture of our mind. So imagine a monocrop agriculture that says, nope, beta, delta our whole life, and that's all I'm going to do. But then somebody comes in and teaches them how to get to alpha on purpose, not just when they were in like accidental wonder. Somebody comes in and teaches them how to get to theta on purpose, not just when they have that aha moment in like once in 10 years with that dream they can remember, but they learn how to get there and they have tools to do it. That's what I do. So Sasha was able to medically explain that magic sauce of like time travel and seeing her great grandmother and getting the wisdom tradition passed down through this book. That's her right and her inheritance that gets blocked maybe by religion and culture and all the disbelief. And so Sasha was able to access the fullness of herself because she got tuned up. We dissolved noise so she could do that. And she was able to access more of herself physiologically and use those natural, by the way, everybody can do that, those natural tools. And, you know, we see it's not dependent on life experience. I mean, life experience is a wonderful thing and we love wisdom. But even kids, you know, people who might not consider that deep, intelligent, rocket scientist, anybody at any level of intelligence can access these tools. It's just kind of cool. We've worked with autism. We've worked with different special needs and neurodivergence in any form. And what we've learned is it's always a good idea to start using more of your brain and body.
All of that was such amazing explanation in a way that I've never heard it before. And I've talked to lots and lots of people who do things similar to what you do. And I think breaking it down that way makes it very relatable. And hopefully if anyone's listening who was kind of like, oh, that's all woo woo, maybe you're like, well, that kind of makes sense because it is, right? We know that we use what is it, like less than 10% of our brain?
Yeah.
There's so much untapped potential in there. It's how do you tap into it? Well, we're never taught how to do that. And, the minute you start getting into the real world and you are now bombarded by all these external influences and all of these narratives and all the things, well, that's what physically, mentally, and emotionally you focus on to deal with because it is the right here and now, which doesn't leave anything left for us to kind of tap into all those things. So this was fascinating. I hope anybody who is just feeling stuck or unsure of their path or, tried everything and nothing just seems to ever go right for them or wherever you are in your life and you're just not 100% happy with where you are, reach out to Astara. I can only imagine how she can help you get from point A to point B. And who knows how many other points you're ready to go forward. But the only way to get out of where you are is to maybe try something new. Yeah, this was incredibly fascinating. And Sasha, as always, thank you for sharing all of your stories. And, I know you've been through a lot. And it's funny, as you were saying about the architect who is a little shamanic. Well, that is Sasha. Yeah. Sasha has a vision that nobody can see. Nobody understands it. And then she brings it to life. And immediately I was like, oh, well, that's Sasha. So yeah, we have our own little shaman on this Be a Better Being podcast. So
yes, you do. Magical yes, Sasha. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And, if you look around my space behind me, there's like paintings and, crystals and different artwork and shelves. And the color of the wall, even everything that sits behind me was formed in somebody's imagination. If you look in your background and look in Sasha's background. So I basically teach people permission slips for the imagination because, not just because I'm a designer, but because that's literally where everything begins. Yeah. And that's a whole nother subject for a whole nother podcast. But on the level of the unseen, basically, I guess my biggest transition, not just moving California to Omaha, but to Nebraska, but moving from the unseen as a designer to the unseen as like a healer, coach, facilitator, teacher. It's a brave new world. And we're going to probably 10, 20, 30 years from now, see how it's going to get into the medical world more and more and more.
Yeah. Much needed. Sasha, any final thoughts before we officially wrap up?
No, I really hope that if you are called to reach out to Astara, that you do. She also has a book that might help you. There it is. How the Stars Tell Time. This will help you and your inner child heal. It's a very beautiful book. And so I strongly suggest you guys picking that up too if you're just looking for a little bit more insight on, what does that even look like? How do you talk to yourself? How can you time travel? What is time travel? What are you talking about? Is this even real? Is there physics behind it? Like all of it. So she talks about energy work, and you don't know what you don't know. And the other thing is, like, nothing's going to change where you are unless something changes. And so just lean on your intuition and your guidance. And just, like I said, if you really, after you listen to this, you're like, okay, this is exactly what I need, then please reach out to Astara, please.
And we will have all of the ways to connect and to find Astara's book in the show notes. So make sure you double check those show notes. Astara, anything that you want to share that you think is really important that we haven't covered?
Well, I thought it would be fun, so I just flipped it open, and I'm just going to read you a quote from the book as a wonderful wrap-up of the things I was talking about. It's perfect. It only takes a few seconds or a minute to change your mind, connect to your heart, and fly yourself to a whole new frequency. So that is that in a nutshell, what I was talking about. So we can all look at ourselves, maybe after this podcast, if you're listening in, that you are a finely tuned instrument. And if you are out of tune, you can tune yourself up, and you have that power. And if you don't know how, I can show you how.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you. I mean, it was really, again, fascinating conversation. Appreciate you coming on and sharing. And everybody listening, you know that it is now up to you to go and be a better being.
Thank you for listening to the Be a Better Being podcast. Michelle and Sasha hope that what you heard today inspires you to embrace this journey of life with an open mind, a kind heart, and a willingness to learn and evolve. If you enjoyed the content, please help spread their message by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. If you have a show topic idea or would like to be a guest, please visit betterbeings.net and fill out a contact form. Until next time, go and be a better being.